The next way we can categorize race is based on reproduction. Okay, so this categorizes race by isolated breeding populations, essentially who mates with whom. Okay, and what this benefit is that it allows for the influence of cultural factors such as religion and economic status. So it allows for things that would influence who you would choose to mate with or who you would be allowed to mate with. It allows for those same influences to influence racial categories. Okay, it's sort of a cause and effect. So if you're religion, you must create offspring with someone within your own religion, then you would mate with them, and then you could create an isolated breeding population. So the religion would have an influence on the racial category. For example, one of the issues with this method of categorizing race is that it creates a lot of independent groups. It creates many, many groups that you wouldn't normally see created if you use just phenotypic categories, for example. Okay, because you're looking at which groups of people mate with each other or breed together, and you're going to have a lot more groups that way. So it can become kind of overwhelming the number of groups you have, and there isn't a ton of additional benefit to that method as opposed to the others. Okay. So I want to talk about just a quick momentarily about the cultural influences on racial categories and how we identify race. And this is a study done by Davenport. And in this study, we're looking at how racial identification is influenced by gender, socioeconomic status, and religious identity. So we know that these are related, but there's not a ton of research on this topic. So how do these other identities shape how you choose your own racial label? So again, we're talking about self-identity. So how do things like your socioeconomic status and your religious identity influence how you choose to self-identify? So all of the participants in this study were multiracial or mixed race. So they biologically or in terms of their parents or grandparents have more than one racial background. The author here asked them to self-identify their race along with their socioeconomic status, gender, and religion. Okay, so he was really just looking for how those categories and how those factors interrelate and play off of each other. So does socioeconomic status change how you might identify if you're mixed race? Okay, and so what Davenport found was that biracial participants are more likely to identify as non-white, okay, than white. Okay. And then the best predictors of a whiter self-identification or a tendency to identify as white as opposed to your other race would be economic affluence and Jewish identity. Okay, so the more affluent you are, the wealthier the individual, the more likely they were to identify as white if they were of white and another race. Same thing with Jewish identity. If they identified as Jewish, as well as white and black, they're more likely to identify as white, okay, than white and black mixed race individuals who identify with a more ethnic religion. Okay, so it would then follow that ethnic religions are associated with non-white self-identification. Okay, and then in terms of gender, women are more likely to identify as multi or biracial than men. Women have more of a tendency to recognize multiple races within themselves as opposed to men who tend to categorize themselves in one or the other. Okay, so this is just another example of a little bit of fluidity within pretty strict racial categories in the United States. It also indicates that, again, race is not biological 100%, right? This is not a biological category. If it was, it wouldn't be quite so influenced by gender, socioeconomic status, and religious identity. So these other cultural factors, all four of these cultural factors, gender, socioeconomic status, and religious identity, as well as racial identity or identification, they're all cultural factors and they all influence each other. Okay, so it's important to keep these things in mind when we're talking about race, is that even in somewhere like the U.S., where race is not very fluid, we have a very strict set of racial categories, it still can be influenced, especially in people who are multiracial or mixed race. So this just kind of reiterates one more time the social construction that is race, and that it is influenced by other cultural factors. And it would then follow that if in our very strict racial categories, if those things can be influenced by other cultural factors, imagine how influential other cultural factors might be in a very fluid racial system that exists in other cultures.